Joining us on the podcast today, he has a new book out. He's the New York Times tennis correspondent, Christopher Clarey. Chris, how are you doing today, sir?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. Thanks. Just got over to the US Open and had an amazing tournament there. So I'm just kind of decompressing here, talking about the book. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a great place to start too, because the US Open obviously just wrapped up. Us being a Canadian podcast and having you on it, I would be remiss if I didn't at least get your thoughts on the run that some of our homebred Canadian men and women had at the US Open, and maybe who even just impressed you the most with the runs that they went on.
You mean the North American Open you're talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not the US Open these days, between Bianca winning it in 2019 and Layla getting to the final and Felix getting to the semis. I mean, it's been all Canada down there. No, it's been great to see. I think it's been a long time coming, and I've been following it obviously as a tennis writer and have seen the progress that your elite players have made. It's been very Layla, for people that are not following the game week to week, think she comes out of the blue. Well, obviously she does not. She's been a long time improving and obviously emerged in her mid-teens there as a great junior player and has been able to build on it. So, and I'm a huge Bianca Andreescu fan in terms of just her tennis and the way she plays the game and the upside of her game if she can get healthy, which is obviously her big challenge. Felix and Dennis, we'll see. It's going to be interesting because those guys are, especially Dennis for me. I mean, I'm a journalist. I wouldn't want to pay money to watch a lot of tennis players at this stage, but I would actually pay to watch Dennis. I just feel like the guy's got this flashy, wonderful game. Love the leftiness, love his ability to create power, and he's so explosive. Felix is more of a smooth, balanced kind of player, not as flashy in that regard. But I mean, talk about four players. Geez, I mean, great talent. I do think the women probably have, in my view, more long-term upside if they can stay healthy, in terms of maybe winning Grand Slam titles and really contending at the highest level. It's going to be pretty dense for the men with Felix and Dennis up against these young guys who've already emerged and won Grand Slam titles. So we'll see. But hey, between right now Canada and the big cousin down to the south, I think Canada's winning the tennis race right now.
Yeah, hey, we'll take it. And like Layla said, maybe it's the maple syrup. Who knows what it is? But clearly cranking out some tennis talent that we're competing on the world's largest stages. So really nice to see. But obviously another massive storyline that sort of came from the US Open, and you actually wrote about it in the New York Times, was Naomi Osaka obviously not having a lot of fun playing tennis right now, possibly stepping away from the game. Now, we won't try and speculate, when or where she'll come back or anything like that. But for the casual tennis fan who might only tune into, the Olympics or a Grand Slam event or something like that, might have shocked them a little bit. But for those that are in the industry and are watching, these players day in, day out, is this something that you guys have maybe noticed looming for a little while, that there were some real struggles going on here?
Well, I think Naomi in particular, I've been following her progress for quite a while. She was somebody I think who, when you watched her win Indian Wells back in 2018, which was kind of her big breakthrough, much like it was for Bianca Andreescu in 2019, you could see when she gave her victory speech, it was just uncomfortable for her. That public eye, that public speaking, that role as a spokesperson, was going to be difficult for her. She really had to, I think, do a lot of work on herself to feel comfortable with that. And then she got put into a position where she became a star by winning the US Open, beating Serena in the final in 2018. And suddenly a huge interest in her from sponsors because of her multicultural background, and got put in a position where she had a lot of opportunity. And of course, you're going to grab that. And I think she also realized that she had a big platform. But I'm not sure that for her, in terms of preparation, in terms of where her natural inclinations are, it was the easiest transition for her. And I'm not going to speculate about everything else that's going on. I mean, we know there's a lot of issues with mental health with the younger generations right now for a lot of reasons. I don't know the extent of that with her. Obviously, she's having struggles with just the game and finding her passion for it and her way with it. Amazing talent. Has really proven herself, obviously, on hard courts. Not so sure about the clay and the grass at this point, but in terms of her hard court tennis, I would say the best women's player in the world at the moment in a lot of ways. So much to play for. If she can find, her niche, find her way to cope with these sorts of things, I don't think it's about the news conferences, frankly. I think it's about much more than that. And she needs to find, her way in this very exposed sport where, basically you're only as good as your last match in a lot of ways. I mean, it's such a vulnerable thing. And there's so much focus on appearance, so much focus on many aspects of how what kind of person you are and what you present to the public. I mean, it's a tough road, and it'd be tough for anybody at any age. And think about these people in their teens and their early 20s having to, be these prominent people in the social media world, it's a lot to ask. It needs a lot of preparation. So we'll see how the sport reacts, and we'll see how professional sport reacts, because these are new pressures. People have always had star issues trying to cope with that. You look back to people like Bjorn Borg and Jennifer Capriati, and it's not always been easy for sure. But now you're basically everybody in the world who follows you can chime in with their opinion, and you got to find a way to block that out or deal with that. And also, you've got gambling, which is a big issue now in terms of the impact it has in terms of the reaction on social media. People who've put a lot of bets on tennis can react in real time. So there needs to be more education with the players, needs to be more protection of the players. And I think there needs to be more of a concerted effort. And I think it's coming in tennis in particular about making sure that people, as they enter the sport, realize where those, rocky shores are, because they're pretty rocky.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, an all-world talent. We wish her all the best. Hopefully, we do see her back on a tennis court sooner rather than later. But first and foremost, get yourself right. Sports will come later, type thing.
But I would say this, and that is, and maybe you want to talk about this too, but I think it's interesting to see what the sport has gone through in the last couple of months, particularly seeing Naomi's struggles and not getting a lot of joy from tennis.
Mm-hmm.
The great thing about this US Open was, I think it brought people a renewed sense of, the power of positive things that tennis can bring. And just to see the joy of Raducanu and Leila Fernandez and their runs, and the kind of delight that it brought to the crowd, and just the feelings that it engendered in the people that were following the tournament, it was just a tonic. And I think it just really gave the sport a huge lift.
Yeah, absolutely. That women's final was electric there. And I mean, I don't know what you were doing at 18, 19 years old, but I certainly wasn't competing on the world's highest stages like they were. So
Yep.
definitely youth being served in a huge way at this year's US Open. Flipping over to the men's side, though, we've got Medvedev upsets Djokovic in straight sets, even to end his bid to become the first man in almost 50 years there to win all 4 Grand Slams in a calendar year. Now, considering how dominant, if we go over the last decade plus, really, that Djokovic, Nadal, Federer have really been, everyone's always been wondering, okay, when's sort of that next wave coming? When's that next wave coming? And do you think we're finally approaching, maybe we can see the shoreline? They might still have a little bit left in the tank, those big 3, so to speak, in tennis there, but that next generation is ready to grab the reins and run with it? Or do you think that experience still has a few years left of dominating most of the major tournaments on circuit?
Yeah, I think we're kind of in the hybrid model right now, if you will. But for sure, no, I think you're seeing what's happening already. It was visible at the non-Grand Slam level. I think at the Masters 1000 level, and the Master at the 500 level, ATP 500. You were seeing guys like Medvedev and Zverev and others, get the big titles at that stage. They just hadn't broken through at the Grand Slams, except for Dominic Thiem at last year's U.S. Open. But then you didn't have Federer and Nadal there, and Djokovic eliminated himself by getting defaulted. So this was the first tournament where at least one of the big 3 was there in the final, obviously with everything to play for, and one of the younger generation knocked him off. And not just knocked him off, but beat him pretty soundly. A lot of reasons for that. But I think definitely you're going to see a more balanced situation now going forward, where some of the younger generation are going to be able to pick off more of these titles. And you're going to see, I think, guys like Djokovic, and I think Nadal, maybe on clay, if he can get healthy with the foot, still going to be factors for the next couple of seasons for sure. But the guard is changing, and it should, and the history of tennis would normally tell you that it would have already happened. So we're in this exceptional period where it hasn't happened for so long, and these same guys have dominated. But I mean, just watch the matches. If you watch Zverev play Djokovic in the semis, if you watched the final, Novak wasn't at his best for sure. But Medvedev has the tools, especially on hard courts, to do consistent damage against the very best players in the world. And I think that's just the way it's going to go. I mean, these guys are only going to get better, and I don't think Novak and Rafa are going to get any better. Mm-hmm. So I think that's all you need to know.
Yeah. Well, if we focus on the book there, obviously one of the big 3 is the focus of your newest book, which is The Master, the long run and beautiful game of Roger Federer. And it's available everywhere now. Now, being a New York Times writer yourself, was it a little bit weird to open the newspaper and actually see your name on the New York Times bestsellers list?
It was such a lifetime high for me. I mean, I've been writing 1,000 word articles for 30 years, day by day, and I'm enjoying it, love my job, but it's just a whole different situation with a book. I mean, it's all of you put out there. It's so much time. I mean, for me, basically, this was 20 plus years in the making, this book. I've been dreaming about it since I was a teenager, writing a a real solid full book. So
Mhm.
to actually get it done after all this thinking and frankly dreaming, let's not, I want to exaggerate, but that's kind of what it was, to finally get it to happen and then to see it hit that list. I mean, geez, what a wonderful thing for me. And however long it lasts, however many it sells, it's just great to see that kind of reaction to it. And I think the timing was good because Roger is obviously coming to the end of his career or near the end of his career. And I think people are really in a mood to look back and appreciate what he's done. And the book is kind of written in that sort of valedictory, nostalgic tone. And it really isn't just about Roger. It's a book about this whole era in men's tennis. So, I think I felt the timing was right. I didn't want to be premature about it, but I felt it was a good time to look at it because it's been an amazing era. And Roger is the main thread in the book, and he's the one I've followed the most. But I think if my goal was, 5, 10 years down the track, if somebody wants to pick up a book to understand what made these guys tick and what made the era special, hopefully my book would be on that list of books they'd want to read about that.
Yeah. And we've had a few authors on the show, and people tend to go one direction or another after releasing a book like this. They either say, "Oh, I can't wait to get my claws into something else," or "Never again. That was the most torturous experience of my life." Have you sort of settled on one of those two ways, or are you just enjoying the ride for what it is right now?
Look, I'm not going to lie. I mean, it was the hardest thing I've done, no doubt. And I've covered a lot of major sports events in my career, many different sports besides tennis. Covering an Olympics from the beginning to the end is pretty challenging,
Mhm.
definitely in terms of sleep deprivation and just using all the words you got in your internal vocabulary. But this was the hardest thing just because it's a big subject. He's a very prominent person in sport, means a lot to a lot of people. I know him well as a journalist. I wanted to do it justice. So I felt a lot of pressure doing it. And I also wanted to bring something new to it. I mean, he's a known quantity. He's been out there for a long time. So have Nadal and Djokovic. And I wanted to learn a lot doing it myself, even though I've been around them a lot. That was one of my goals. So that just all those things made it challenging, and having not done it before. I mean, long form is, as you probably know, I mean, it's just the biggest challenge is structure.
Mhm.
You're trying to figure out how do you organize all these uh, connections, interviews. How do you organize all these locations? Try to find a way to do this era justice and not get bogged down in a million forehands and a million backhands. And so that was challenging to figure out the structure, and then had to be adjusted on the fly. And it just seemed like, in a lot of ways, what what I really I found to be the day-to-day challenge was just, in our business as sports writers, you have a certain amount of time each day, or maybe a couple of days, to put your story together. And
Mhm.
I've long ago come to peace with the idea that I can't be perfect, and that I've got to just get it done in the time that I have and then move on. And I can live with that. And in a way, it's a great excuse because you didn't have any more time. Deadline has arrived. It's got to go out into the world, and whoever wants to read it will read it. But with a book, you have so much time.
Mhm.
And so it becomes a situation where is it ever good enough? Are you ever happy with it? So I think that's what it is. And ultimately, the deadline comes in book writing too, thank goodness. But it's a lot longer out there. So it was just a great challenge. And so I think the answer to your question, roundabout fashion, yes, I'd like to do another one, but I can't say it was like a joyride from start to finish, because it wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, something that coaches will always preach to youth athletes and all that coming up, and regardless of what sport it is you can't really flip a switch. You have to always be preparing yourself for the next event, for the next match. It doesn't just go on like that. But something that's always struck me about Federer is just how private he is off the court, how calm, easygoing he seems to be, always cool, calm, collected, all of that. But then on the court, he manages to turn into the Terminator at the drop of a hat, it seems like. So, in speaking with those who know him best, and even Roger himself, like, what did you sort of take away from that experience as far as trying to explain how he's able to flip that switch when the lights are their absolute brightest and all eyes are on him?
And that was one of the most interesting things in going back and reporting out this book, was to see his process and how he did that, because it really wasn't his nature. And
Mhm.
this was a guy, I mean, most people who follow tennis, and a little bit older as well, have followed it for a long time, know that Roger had an issue with his temper when he was younger, that he was a bit more volatile. But I didn't realize to what degree it was really a problem for him, and how much it was holding him back. And a lot of coaches early on, and people in junior tennis, knew he had this amazing ability with his shot making, obviously a great athlete, great mover and everything else, but they felt that his emotional reactions to tennis were going to hold him back and maybe keep him from being a great player. So that was really one of his biggest challenges, aside from just learning how to construct points and play the game well, was to figure out a way to manage the emotions. And honestly, the more you think about it, a lot of great players over the years have been held back by these issues. And tennis is such a frustrating game because you can never perfect it. And if you have that kind of personality where you want to perfect it, you're going to always be frustrated. And I think Roger had just a lot of trouble accepting his errors, accepting the defeats when they came. And there's stories in the book of him when he was young. Basically, they'd be playing junior events. He'd be underneath the chair umpire's chair in Switzerland and still crying after the matches were over. All the other kids had taken their box lunches and gone off to hang out in the clubhouse, and Roger's still out there, having a hard time coping with it. And I just think he had a really difficult time finding a way to do that. And I think the book, when he writes his autobiography, which I'm sure he will someday, I know that'll be a big part of it. And he can go into all the processes of his mind and how he did it. But I think I have a pretty good understanding of it now. And he definitely did it with a lot of different tools, and it took him a long time. I'd say that sort of 1998 when he won Wimbledon junior title at age 16 to 2003 when he won Wimbledon, the real title, for the first time. That 5-year period was very important for him in many respects. And that was kind of when he found a way to dominate, change his approach. And ultimately, sports psychology helped. He had a sports psychologist, I think, working on himself. He lost somebody very close to him. Peter Carter, his childhood coach, died in 2002 in an accident in South Africa. And that definitely was one of the most pivotal moments in Roger's career. And all that sort of shaped his mentality and I think made him realize what he needed to do. And that was, there are guys, and we've seen him, you can look at Djokovic, that can blow off a lot of steam and still be great players. Roger, I think, realized he couldn't do that. And not only that, he didn't want to do that. That wasn't the image he wanted to present to the world. I think he wanted to be somebody who gave that gentlemanly, more Zen-like image to the world when he played tennis, because he knew he was going to be a lot of replays, a lot of looking at his game through a microscope. And I think he just decided that was not who he wanted to be. But ultimately, he had to suppress a lot of things in him to create that, what you talked about, that image that you see of him. And one of the interesting things in this book was talking to some of the younger people who follow the game now, podcasters in their 20s and readers in their 20s. They really didn't know this. The Roger that they know is the Roger that, the final product.
Yeah.
Kind of Zen master. Yeah, he's got occasional blips. Racket might get tossed once in a while, or a shout, or a word he shouldn't use. But amazingly, together for a guy who's been in the public eye that long. That's all they ever knew. So for them, that's been a real revelation to go back and realize, wow, this guy made this progress and how far he came. And I think that's one of the most interesting parts of the book. And his own path is just how he did it, how hard it was, and that the guy we're seeing out there, he really had to change himself and maybe not play to who he really is when he's playing his matches. He had to find a way to kind of tamp that part down to bring out his best tennis. So I think everybody's a bit different, but that's what worked for him, obviously.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you just said there, we're talking about late 90s going all the way back to when he was at the highest levels of the junior sport. So he's been in the public spotlight forever. Obviously, a very successful athlete, tons of awards, money, fame, whatever it is you want to name. He's probably been there, done that at this stage of his career. What do you think still drives him now at this stage of his career? Is it legacy? Is it something else? Like, what is it that gets him out of bed ready to compete against the best in the world day in, day out at this age?
Well, there are a couple of things. I mean, Roger seems smooth and cool, and I think he is in a lot of ways. He's a very engaging, charming guy in person when you interview him. Somebody who's got a lot of empathy and charisma. It's not as polished as he might seem. And talking to him, can be goofy, and he's not always in English. It's not always making total sense, but he's got great energy.
Yeah,
great guy. But I think he's a competitor, and don't forget that, because that the guy that was fighting himself and having a hard time with losing when he was a teenager, that's still in there, huh? That's driving him. He doesn't like to lose. He's a deeply competitive guy. This is a guy, one of the most amazing things about his career is that he has never still retired from a match at any level of professional tennis, which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
He's played 1,600 matches and never has he pulled a hamstring. He's had back injuries, things that hang him along. He's never stopped. Once he starts a match, he finishes it. And I've seen him obviously in times when he shouldn't have finished it, but he did. So that whatever that is in him that makes him do that, that is a driving, strong force. So as cool as he can look, the guy's got grit and the guy's got fight, and the guy, so he enjoys the competitive aspects of the sport for sure. And I also think over time, he became an ambassador for tennis. I mean, Djokovic, you could argue quite convincingly, I think, is on paper has had a more successful tennis career now, even though they're all tied at 20 Grand Slams each. I mean, Novak across the range of achievement in men's tennis now probably has more boxes to tick than Roger does. But you look at Roger's whole role in tennis. I mean, the guy has carried the torch for the sport for a long time and done an enormous amount of good for the sport in terms of the people he reaches and all across the world. And I think he's taken that to heart over time. And I know from talking to him, that communion with the public, which for him is not just a Swiss or European or Canadian or American public, but really a global public. I've followed him all over the world. And this is pretty much the same case wherever he goes. That means a lot to him. And I think he gets a lot of joy and a lot of pleasure out of that. Much like a guy, if you're Led Zeppelin or the Stones or whoever you are, and you're hitting the road and you're getting that connection with your public, that keeps you going. And I think for him, that grit, competitive aspect, the fact that he just really has developed a deep connection with the public. And the third thing I think is the guy he just likes the feel of the ball and the strings. He likes the feeling of practicing his craft. He's never burned himself out. Something he told me, he goes, I've never been burned out. And I think that's been very intentional on his part, something we can all learn from. He's understood himself, what his limits were, when he needed to kind of pull back. He talks about this clenched fist image a lot. He uses this when we talked about tennis a lot. And he says, you can only keep your fist clenched for so long. You got to relax it at some points. And it's very, very important to be intentional about when you do that. So that was one of the most interesting things, and spending a lot of time with him over the years. And I think he's right. I think that's why he was able to play until we'll see how he does now, but he's 40 years old, but definitely into his late 30s, and to be very successful because he understood, when and when not to clench.
Absolutely. And I mean, obviously you've been covering not only Roger, but tennis in general for a long time now. And, you know, what's something that maybe didn't make the book, but is just a good example of a story or an incident where this is what separates Roger from his peers. This is why he's different. Does anything jump out to you that maybe didn't make the final cut?
Well, I mean, it's a pretty long book, so a lot of things made the cut.
Yeah.
Maybe I should have been a few things that didn't make the cut, actually, as it turns out. But if you ever get through it, or if you get through it, you tell me. But I feel like one of the stories in there that is really interesting is just how he handles some of the things that people in the sport tend to think of as drudgery. I would say, a lot of the top players, they love, competition perhaps, or they enjoy the fruits of their labor, the money that it brings, and all those sorts of things. Maybe the adulation, but not so many of them probably get a big kick out of interviews when they become too numerous, or news conferences, or sponsor appearances, or internal politics of the ATP. And I'm not sure Roger loves those things. He's a people person, no doubt about it. Some guys are not. Some guys that drains them. Roger, he gets a lot of energy from it. But I think Andy Roddick, who was great for the book, one of the best interviews I did for the book was with Andy, gave me a lot of time and a lot of great insight into Roger and their own rivalry at the time back in the earlier 2000s. He talked about when Roger came to do a charity thing for one of Roddick's foundations after Roddick retired. Those guys stayed friendly. Mm-hmm. Another sign of Roger's kind of character is that these guys he's played with and beaten up on still like him. I'm not sure it's always the case.
Yeah.
So he's managed to manage those relationships pretty well. So he goes, shows up at this Andy Roddick Foundation thing in Texas, flies in. Roger's still an active player, still in his career, and he shows up and basically says, "Hey, I'm here. What do we need to do? Tell me about your charity, so I don't just know. I want to know exactly what you're doing, so I can talk about it intelligently. And let's go in there and do this." And didn't ask, when am I supposed to be done? Didn't in any way. The guy just plunged in, something that would have been drudgery for a lot of people, I think. Did it with joy. And Andy said, he thought he'd be chaperoning him around, sort of talking to him. This is this person, kind of helping him through. He said Roger just left him after about 5 seconds, plunged into the crowd, started talking to people, questions, answers, completely natural. One guy with donor had twins. Roger's got 2 sets of twins, as you know, comparing twin notes, just, and I guess in a sense, you and me, we're average people. So if one of our friends did this, not that they'd be in a sponsor situation, but this is kind of how average people would react, and it would be normal.
Yeah.
Superstar athletes, they get credit for being normal, I suppose, but it's true. I mean, they get catered to. It becomes a different set of rules, different set of expectations. And Roger, I think one of his great things, and Andy points this out, is his process, he kept it normal and relaxed. And I think he liked that. And I think it came very naturally to him. And so he basically, they went through this whole day of sponsor thing. It's time to go. Rogers stayed longer. His flight got delayed, went back in the room, started talking to people again some more. It just was a very revealing thing. Roddick, just to see a guy like Roddick, who's also a star, knows the situation. He was just blown away by the way Roger handled the whole thing. And the guy's got his faults. He's not a saint. The book hopefully doesn't give that impression, because he's not. But he does a lot of things well. And one of the things he does well is when he does something, he does it with good energy and intention, and he's present. Mm-hmm. And frankly, in this world of, distracted living that we're all in, and superstar athletes getting catered to from the age of 7 or 8 till they retire, it's refreshing, and I think edifying to see somebody do it a different way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He's certainly a unique in that respect for sure. But we've got to remember too, this is someone who recently turned 40. He's going to be undergoing knee surgery. Now, do you get the sense that he's saying, "Oh, I'm coming back for sure. I'm definitely coming back"? Is that because he's just such a competitive person and he wants to come back and leave the sport on his own terms as opposed to going out because of an injury? Or do you think there's an outside chance we might be seeing, a second act to Federer's career here, a la maybe a Tom Brady down in Tampa Bay there, and we've got some more juice left in the tank, so to speak?
That's a great question. I hesitate to count Roger out if he believes in something. I feel like Tom Brady needs to drop back and release a pass and make great decisions. Mm-hmm. Roger has to drop back and run like crazy for 3 or 4 hours in a Grand Slam match with spurts of speed and hand-eye coordination on the fly against a bunch of young guys coming for him. Not quite the same physical challenge, I would mm-hmm. say. There have been tennis players who have in their early 40s been able to do pretty well. Guys like Pancho Gonzalez back in the day, or Ken Rosewall for sure. But, I just don't see it myself that he's going to be able, best of 5 tennis, to come back and win Grand Slam titles anymore. But hey, the guy has proven that he has his grit. He's proven he loves the game. If his knee surgery can be done in a way that he's able to come back healthier than he was at last year's Wimbledon, or this last year's Wimbledon, when obviously he was not right, when he played on a bad knee, he lost the last set of a straight set loss in the quarters to Hubie Hurkacz 6-love. That's not the way he wants to say goodbye to the sport or to Wimbledon. I know he doesn't. Mm-hmm. But the only problem is I'm not so sure that you get to pick your end game, or that you're not guaranteed to have a better ending if you come back. But if he wants to come back and play healthy and feel like, he's giving it a real shot and not being limited, who can begrudge him that? I can't. I just don't see him winning Grand Slam titles anymore at this stage. Can he come back and have a great Wimbledon maybe? If he's feeling it because of his grass court expertise and he's 100% healthy, why the heck not? But what's he playing for? If that's what gives him meaning at this point in his life, and that's what he wants to do, then, I think it's great. I don't think that's going to happen. That's just my educated guess at this point. And I don't think he has anything left to prove. Would have been great for him, I'm sure, if he would have beaten Djokovic at the Wimbledon final in 2019 with the 2 match points. I mean, I know that's got to be still in his brain somewhere, and he's right. That would have been the ultimate. No. And he was right there. Matter of maybe an inch on a first serve that would have been an ace that hits the tape instead. So, that's a tough thing to deal with. But there's so many things that he has done over the years that are good and positive. So I think in the end game, he's got to feel pretty good about the calculations he's making about what he's brought to the game and what he achieved.
For sure. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us today. We could talk tennis with you for hours, but for those that are listening that want to either connect with you on social media, see your articles, pick up a copy of the book, where are the best places to find all things Chris Clarey these days?
Well, you're nice to ask. Thank you. I mean, I'm on Twitter a lot. I use it to communicate with my readers, and also take some constructive criticism. It being Twitter.
Yeah.
I've developed a thicker skin over 10 years of using it for sure. But I think generally people have great attitudes, and I appreciate the input and the suggestions. But the book itself is, one of the great things and gratifying things about it is it's gotten a really global release in a lot of ways. And we have 16 foreign deals for the book. In a lot of different languages as well. But I know in Canada, it's been out for a couple of weeks now, and the reaction so far has been wonderful. I am always somebody who encourages people to support independent bookstores if you can. If you need to order it online, great. But if you have the wherewithal to do it and don't mind spending maybe a little bit more money, pick it up in your local bookstore and support those community-based things. I think that's a great way to go. And I hope you enjoy it, whoever reads it, and feel free to let me know through Twitter what you think.
Amazing. The book, it's out now. It's The Master, The Long Run and Beautiful Game of Roger Federer. Go and pick up a copy today. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you very much. We'll be watching the Canadians dominate the tennis world here, so I appreciate that.